David! David!
Dave, are you in the fridge again? Get out of the fridge!
David! What is up, everyone? I am your host, David Wells, and this is the David Wells Experiment. And today we're going to talk about Japanese role-playing games, or JRPGs. So I looked at an article recently where the current president of Square Enix said that they can't mimic Western RPGs. And the reason he said that was because recently Japanese RPGs have not dominated the global market in the same way that they had as in the past, and that it was actually Western RPGs that had overtaken them. So when he was asked, does that mean y'all are going to start copying what Western RPG makers are going to do? And he said, no, it's best that we not do that. Sure, we could try, but people like Japanese RPGs for a reason, and we'd only be doing ourselves a disservice if we just tried to copy and ape what Americans or whatever any other Western market was trying to do. So I thought that's fair. And to be honest, the headline of the article I was reading from, they made it sound like, oh, we should never copy Americans. But I think they were a bit clickbaity with that title. And he does have a good point. It makes me think of in the early 2000s and the late 90s when anime and manga were getting really popular in the US for the first time. I mean, there had been inroads of it in the US prior to that, but it was really starting to pick up ground in the US back then. And one of the things I noticed was that certain creators in America, whether it be animation or comic books, they only tried to imitate sort of the superficial aspects of anime and manga to try to cash in on the whole, well, this is what kids are into these days. And those efforts almost always seem to fail. Like a big example of that would be Totally Spies. I never got into that show, and I was like, this isn't, it felt fake. I guess it would be like if, somebody from Mexico went to Taco Bell and was like, what am I eating? But anyway, yeah, it wasn't like how Avatar The Last Airbender, while you could tell it wasn't from Japan, it they knew the source material enough that they could pay tribute to it while acknowledging that, okay, we don't come from the same culture, which I think is so important to anime and manga being anime and manga, but we pay homage and inspiration from that while acknowledging our own American heritage. I mean, I feel like that's fair. I feel like Avatar The Last Airbender was never trying to trick anyone, and I think that's why you could say they were more successful, quote unquote, American anime. So, anyway, it got me to thinking that whole incident where he said we're not going to try to copy American RPGs or Western RPGs. It got me to thinking about the conventions of role playing games or Japanese RPGs. And it just so happened that they took they did sort of copy American RPGs, but not in the way you would think. So what happened is role-playing games became a thing in like the 70s, and there were inroads of it towards electronics like PCs and video games, but nobody really figured out how to give it broad mass appeal. It took Japanese RPGs to make that happen, and the way they did that was with Dragon Quest, or as it was known in the US for a brief period of time, Dragon Warrior Monsters. My familiarity with Dragon Quest happened to be in that period where they couldn't use the name Dragon Quest because a certain American company had the rights to it back then. They've since relinquished the rights to that, and now everybody knows it as Dragon Quest, even in America. So anyway, the way I became familiar with it was through Pokemon. So Pokemon was a lot of people's introduction into RPGs. I remember I couldn't even conceptualize something like an RPG. My mind was stuck in the idea of, oh, level 1, level 2, level 3, a boss. There wasn't that sort of free ranging, free roaming nature that I just couldn't. RPGs were basically like nothing I could have thought of. I couldn't have even conceptualized them. But Pokemon introduced me to that. And the fact that you could take your time with them, that was something that stuck out. I mean, sure, there were platformers that did that, but even in platformers where there wasn't a clock ticking, there was still stuff happening, and you had to be very reactionary. You had to, yeah, with RPGs, you could take your time, as I've said before. But anyway, so my introduction to Dragon Quest was through a spin-off called Dragon Warrior Monsters, which from this point on I'll refer to as Dragon Quest Monsters. So anyway, I loved Pokemon knockoffs. I mean, maybe love is a bit of a strong word, but I enjoyed them for the sole reason that I liked Pokemon, but they didn't always come out with a new game. So if there was an opportunity to play something like that, and if I could possibly get the same level of enjoyment, I was up for it. And Dragon Quest Monsters was one of those games that I saw. I was just cruising through the video game section of I forget what store, probably Target or Kmart, and I saw the artwork and I thought, okay, that looks interesting. I could tell it was a Pokemon knockoff. So that was on my little radar that I was going to try this game out if I got the opportunity. So the opportunity comes where somebody bought it for me and I enjoyed it. It wasn't exactly like Pokemon. There wasn't the certainty of catching monsters. Basically, you would throw food at the monsters, and if you beat them, there was a chance that they might want to join your party. So it differed in that regard. I think one of the reasons why none of the Pokemon knockoffs were ever as successful as Pokemon was because they couldn't imitate the mechanics of it too much. Probably because they didn't want to get sued by Nintendo or the Pokemon Company, or as Game Freak as it was known back then. So anyway, I enjoyed it. I had fun. I kind of put it down for years, and then several years later, I finally decided I'm going to beat this game. So I did that, and woohoo, and I had a good time. There was a sequel to it called Dragon Quest Monsters 2, big surprise. And in that one, they sort of tried to imitate the whole different versions thing. If you've been living under a rock for the last 30 years, Pokemon had two versions, red and blue, and each version had different monsters. So they did a similar thing with Dragon Quest 2, Dragon Quest Monsters 2. They tried that. I never got to play it, but if it ever comes on my radar, if I ever feel like it, I'll probably actually I may I might give a serious go at that. But anyway, getting back to this my main point. So anyway, I was so Dragon Quest was the first RPG that we kind of think of when you think of RPGs. So let's see. So one of the things that it did was it simplified everything. RPGs were known for like Dungeons and Dragons, the tabletop RPGs, and those could be hugely and intricately complex. You really have to study it before you know how to navigate things. So one of the things that they knew was going to make RPGs appealing to the masses was that it needed to be simple. So they did that. They streamlined everything to where a person could grasp it. But even then, there needed to be some explaining. So they printed a special issue of in the manga Shonen Jump, and it explained how does an RPG work, and the sales went through the roof. So Dragon Quest did really well in Japan, and Dragon Quest 2 did really great, and with each iteration they were a financial success. But in the US that wasn't the case. It took until Pokemon for RPGs to really gain a foothold. That and Final Fantasy 7, so I don't get skewered on Twitter or whatever, like I have that many followers right now, lol. So anyway, that happened, and we've got RPGs now. So it comes as a shock to me that RPGs or Japanese RPGs aren't as they don't command the same attention that they used to, that Western RPGs have overtaken them. And I think the way to fix that is to focus on what makes the traditional Japanese role-playing game feel exciting. Now, here's the thing. Those early ones, Dragon Quest 1 and 2, both of which I've played, liked them. Dragon Quest 3 not so much. Um they're both grind sessions. Basically, you do something that can be seen as very rote and repetitive, but it's the goal at the end of it that makes you feel like, oh, I want to invest my time in this. When you level up, or you can finally go into this area and beat these monsters, that's what makes all that rote, repetitive stuff feel worthwhile. And some people don't like that. And I can't help but wonder, does that speak to an aspect of American and Japanese culture, where in America, we don't like to grind. I think there's that whole work smarter, not harder thing. Whereas in Japan, they're all about hustle. Schools are so difficult. And I can't help but feel that because that's so ingrained in their culture, that having a game that asks the same thing, it's not a big leap for them. So I think that's one reason why Japanese role playing games haven't changed so much, or why Japanese developers will still develop something that requires that. And it makes sense that Americans would develop a different type of role playing game. I mean, I've looked at the old Dragon Quest, and it almost feels like an RPG Maker RPG game. For those who don't know, RPG Maker is this game engine that was developed, I think, maybe in the late 80s or early 90s, that allowed people to make their own role playing games. They had a bunch of pre rendered assets and very simple editing tools. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that that was brought over to the US officially, and Americans could do the same thing. And these games are accused of feeling very generic. Like if you play one, you've played them all. And it feels kind of true of that in Dragon Quest 1 and 2. But this was the game that sort of set the standard, so of course it might feel that way. So anyway, um I got to play Dragon Quest 1 and 2 in the winter of 2020 and the early months of 2021. I had a Switch. I saw both games on the eStore, and I decided to play them. And I've said before, they're simple by today's standards. They're very much grind sessions, but the payoff seemed to be good. So in Dragon Quest 1, there's this dragon lord who his castle is right across from the main hero's castle, but it's separated. It's on this island, and you got to go all over the place to find the stuff that'll make this bridge appear so you can go and take him on. Now, the thing about this game is there isn't much to do afterwards because you beat the boss and that's it. I mean, maybe if you don't max out your level, maybe you can go back and try it again and get progressively stronger. But the thing with me was I maxed out, and yeah, I didn't have anything left to do. No weapons to go seek. If I did a second run of it or a third run, I've already beat it twice, I would maybe do that again. But with it's one of those games that if you've beat it a couple times, you have to let some time pass so it can seem fresh to you again. So I'm already sort of trying to do it again on my mobile phone because there is a mobile phone version of it. Big surprise. So, yeah, I did that with the second game. Now, here's the thing about the second game, Dragon Quest II. In Dragon Quest II, you can go back to the land of the previous game, and you can go to the castle of the boss that you fight at the end. Now, that boss isn't there, obviously, because you beat him, but his descendant is there, and he says, like, oh, there's this other villain who's trying to take over. And he says something like, won't you join me or something? It doesn't really give you an option to join him. Anyway, I feel like if Dragon Quest II were made today, after you beat the main boss of Dragon Quest II, I feel like you could go back to the land of Dragon Quest 1 and at the very least fight that guy, the descendant of the main bad guy of Dragon Quest 1. But again, this game was made way back in like the late 80s or early 90s. So maybe it was a result of technical limitations. Maybe it was just an idea they hadn't thought of. Because again, this was the early days of RPGs. So there's any number of reasons they could have not done it. So some modern players might feel it's repetitive or, yeah, it's too basic. But it took that first step to make a Japanese RPG as we know it. I think one of the reasons why Pokemon has endured and why people make claims that Pokemon is repetitive. But here's the thing. Okay, I'm going to comment on why I wasn't so thrilled with Pokemon Go. I played it and I felt I got my money's worth out of it, but I didn't feel like going back and exploring it again. Now, I did like the remakes they did for the Game Boy Advance. But here's the thing. When I played Pokemon Go, I found out, oh, you can't randomly battle Pokemon in the wild like you could in the first one. One of the things that I did like about Pokemon Go, oh, I should clarify. Pokemon Go is the mobile app game. Pokemon Go Let's Go Pikachu and Pokemon Let's Go Eevee, those were remakes of Pokemon Red and Blue for the Nintendo Switch. So in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu or Let's Go Eevee, you can't fight random Pokemon like you could in the previous games. The main focus is to capture them. Now, one of the things that I'll say what I like before I say what I don't like. One of the things that I like is you don't have to go to a PC like in the old game to switch out your party. You can switch out your party anywhere you go. And you got to wonder why they didn't do that in the first game. Maybe the idea didn't occur, or maybe there was a technical limitation. Who knows? So that's pretty much the only thing I really do like from the. Okay, no, it's not. There's another thing I like. Whenever you fight, all your Pokemon get some experience, so that's cool. I could hear how some people would say, but that sort of removes the challenge. And I say, that's a fair point. But I feel like I would be nitpicking. So, yeah. Alrighty. Now, the things that I don't like. The fly HM move, um, it used to be that's how you would get around towns once you've traveled to a town. If you visited a town before, you could just fly there. The, this time around, it just feels like a variation. It does the same thing that the bicycle does in Pokemon, except it lets you go over a building. It doesn't allow you to instantaneously go to a place. Maybe that's what you do with teleport, but I never found a Pokemon in Let's Go Pikachu or Let's Go Eevee that could do that, so I never got to use the move. So maybe my point is rendered moot. But one of the reasons I think that Pokemon, they've been able to be so repetitive with each game, and this is one of the things they get criticized for, but one of the reasons they've been able to do it for so much longer is because you don't have just one challenge. You have two, so that the monotony is broken up somewhat. If you want to fight, you can fight, but if you get bored with that, you can go on a capturing spree. So even just that slight variation is enough to make a grind session more bearable than it otherwise would be. So yeah, those are my thoughts on RPGs, Dragon Quest and Pokemon. I should probably do something that's more about the intricacies and nuances of RPGs, but instead I just kind of listed my experience with two particular RPGs franchises. I feel like I watched an RPG Maker video, like how to make an interesting one, and they talk about how if you want to make an interesting RPG, you've kind of got to hone in on something interesting. You've got to hone in on like great battle mechanics or great stories or interesting layouts. If you can have at least just one of those, it'll help your game to not be so generic. or just feel like something thrown together. You have to at least stand out in one way. So I thought I was going to finish my video or podcast with that, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about RPG Maker, since that game or that engine brings to light so many of the contrivances of Japanese role-playing games. One thing I would love to have in a new RPG Maker engine is I would love if there was more customization, because you've got to get several plugins in order to make your own artwork or your own music or your own battle mechanics. And one thing that they don't have is an option for capturing monsters, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The game has been out for 20 years. So many people were probably brought to it by an interest in Pokemon, and there are plugins for that, and there are all kinds of tutorials for how to set up a monster capturing system. But it would be great if there was already an option for that you didn't have to sweat so much for. But anyway, those are just my complaints. I wouldn't be surprised if in order to be able to do that, you've got to find a bunch of different plugins, but that's so time consuming. It would be great if you could have that a part of the system already, so you'd have to do a lot less work. But who knows? Maybe we'll see it down the line. I certainly hope so. There was a recent version called RPG Maker MZ, but I hear it's not too different from RPG Maker MV. So down the line, who knows? But I kind of feel like if we're peaking with the generation that grew up with Pokemon Red and Blue, they would have done it by now. So who knows? Maybe if you really want to make a Pokemon clone or a ripoff, you just go ahead and study a more proper game engine, or should I say a more intricate game engine like Unity or Unreal Engine. But who knows? So anyway, that's my thought on RPGs. This has been the David Wells experiment. Shoot, I almost forgot the name of my own show, lol. Take two. This has been the David Wells experiment. Have an absolutely super day, and we will see you next time. Bye.